Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. As many of us approach midlife, I'm sure that there's been an experience of pain. One of those things that we tend to elude or actually walk away from and forget all about if possible, but sometimes the pain is unbearable and hidden so deep that we're not even aware that it's there until somehow something happens where those wounds of forgotten pain seem to come and find their way to the surface to be dealt with. Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is someone who did just that very thing. She unlocked the forgotten wounds of childhood abuse, freeing her to follow her inner-driven, more deliberate, more intentional, and joyful way of life while still striving to serve those who needed help as well. Always an adventurer, our guest today soaked up knowledge and experience to enhance her skills, but it was in the taking of a workshop by the renowned Ilana Rubenfeld, founder of the Rubenfeld Synergy Method, that our guest today found her first real key. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, the author of The Propelled Heart, Moving from Injury to Insight. Tony Luisa Rivera is joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program. Tony, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Daniel. It's a real pleasure.
Well, I like being able to be in a position to please people that have pain, to make them realize there's something to move forward to. And sometimes when people are in situations, especially very painful ones, they almost feel like it's going to go on forever and there's no way out. Did you ever feel that way?
Oh, yes, and I was just talking actually this morning to my father about that, how especially physical pain, there's something about it that we just think it's just never going to end. And emotional pain can be even stickier. So I did feel that way. And in meeting, really first discovering that it was there and kind of driving me emotionally first, through the Rubenfeld Synergy Method, I saw a way to actually heal and help others heal.
Now, in your book, you stated something that I hadn't really heard before, and that is the way that we tend to memorize things. Now, I think it was up to about the age of 5, you say that what happens is our memories tend to be imprinted cellularly, versus as we get older, we tend to remember things in a different way. Talk about that a little bit. I thought that was really interesting to see that perspective.
Well, you know, the brain has different growth spurts that it goes through, and around 5 is a very definite shift in a child's way of being in the world. And people who've been around children a lot will see that, how before 5 there's kind of more of a dreamy quality, and some people even talk about, you know, the children will say the darndest things. They'll see things in a completely different way because the perspective is so different. And memories at that age are stored in the body in such a way that they're related with movement, touch, and in the body themselves. All memories, I think, of our whole life are recorded somewhere cellularly in our bodies. But after 5, we start to have a linear perspective where we can say, oh, yeah, I lived in the blue house on Sycamore Lane, and I went to that school, and things are fit together in a more linear way that makes sense to our logical mind. But before 5, it's not that way. We will have, for instance, in my case, where something happened to me before that age, it was really through my body that it was presented back to me, having sensations in my body, seeing my body in my mind's eye at that age, and actually feeling kinesthetically that my body was small. And then that's how working with that through the Rubenfeld Synergy was how the snippets here and there started to come together to form something that I could make sense in my logical mind out of.
Now, it's interesting because of the fact that you're talking about a memory that we probably wouldn't remember when it comes to a mindful way of looking at things. Like you said, it was stored cellularly. What was it that actually began to trigger for you to bring this up to the surface in the first place?
Well, one of my the first things that happened when I started taking the Rubenfeld Synergy training was the first time having gone to chiropractic college. I'm a chiropractor, 4 years of school, and before that, 2 years of the pre-med training to go to chiropractic college was very much studying about everything outside myself. And it was through noticing my clients having mental, emotional things, similarities reoccur in their life that would create the exact same physical problem, that I started saying, I need to learn more about the mind and the emotions and how they create physical manifestations. So when I took the Rubenfeld training, it was the first time that someone actually touched me in a way for me to become aware of myself. I was always touching other people, right?
Ah.
So when I was the client and the synergist placed their hands on my hip and said, what are you aware of here? And when I turned my attention inward to me and my body was when I started experiencing that the sensations I had were very unusual. The first things I felt was like a layer of rock all on the outside of my body, and that inside was empty. And it was very sad. Emotion came up, a lot of sadness, and I just did not understand what was going on, that I was empty inside and then had rock on the outside. It just didn't make sense to me. And then as I continued that exploration, when I would have sessions, my synergist noticed when she touched my face, I would stop breathing completely. And then she noticed, and she brought it to my awareness. I said, gee, yeah, even wherever you touch me, I go somewhere in my head and I'm watching, like, what are you going to do next? That was my response inside.
Wow.
What are you going to do to me? Even though I'm safe, I knew her, I was safe in her office, but that was my, what would you say, innate response. That was like a reflex. And that started me. We kept on this path, and one morning I woke up, and in that dreamy state when you first wake up, and I experienced my lower body as very small, like a little girl of, 3, 4 years old. And the strangest sensation to feel your lower body as if it was tiny, And I took that to my session, and that was the first time I actually realized that as we went into that, I had images and, somebody doing something to me,
mm-hmm.
And I was frozen and kind of above my body watching. Mm-hmm. And that's when I said, oh, goodness, something happened to me. I really had to, and it took years really to fit the pieces together and to even be able to believe it myself,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's quite a journey to do this kind of thing, and thank God not everybody has suffered, with these kind of things, but it's part of the human condition, really, some wound happens in our life. And I really wanted to write the book, The Propelled Heart, Moving from Injury to Insight, because I really see now how I've been able to take those wounds. The rock is gone. My body is filled in. I'm completely here now. And I'm able to use that sensitivity and empathy and that I developed really through the wound to really serve and give my gift to the world through my sensitivity. And I want to encourage others that there is a way through to heal and be able to achieve an insight into how whatever has happened to you has made you the unique you that you are, and that you have gifts to offer through having thrived after whatever wound it is.
Now, how would you say, in your experience, that the way you chose to go when it came to healing was different than a typical conventional, let's say, talk therapy?
I feel the big difference is that the way that I work and the way that I chose to experience my healing was that allowing the body to present, to guide the way, if you will. Instead of sitting and talking about, okay, this is what happened to me and this is the way I feel, and which can lead you deeper into the feelings of, why me? How could they do this to me? I'm really angry, and I think those are stages that I also went through. But since my body was the guide, it was in a more organic way. It wasn't through my intellect. It was through my intelligence, if you will, the intelligence of the heart and the body. And so instead of analyzing it, I really was able to have a perspective from the inside, which allowed me to heal, I think, much quicker. When I work with people, sometimes if they've had a lot of therapy, talk therapy, they just want to talk, and it really takes a while to calm everything down and say, but what is your body saying? Where in your body is that feeling of sadness? And by taking that approach through the body, things move much quicker. And many times I do have clients that work with a talk therapist and myself, and I have talk therapists refer people to me because they see that the body as a guide leads you through much quicker through the healing process than just talking around things intellectually.
Well, I can see how that makes a lot of sense, too. Sitting there and rehashing a story, as you said, you intellectually can describe this, but really the feeling and the emotional vibration are extremely important in something like this, isn't it?
It is, and that's held in the body, and how you have dealt with it in yourself is in the body. Did you store it somewhere? Do you tamp it down by eating or overworking? Was my main thing at the time when I discovered this was, wow, I'm working 12 hours a day, and people say, how do you do it? You're so dedicated. It was really that I needed 70 people a day in my chiropractic practice to tell me I was good, to counteract the self-sabotage inside of telling myself how bad I was, without even realizing I just had a habit of telling myself how terrible I was. But it related back to the childhood injury. I couldn't even recognize my accomplishments in the moment because I was still back telling myself how terrible I was from when I was little.
Now, that experience specifically, when it comes to about what happened in your childhood, was that of sexual abuse. And I found it, eye-opening when I read about, the predators, so to speak, and the minions, as you called them.
Right.
And I think what was surprising about that is how, although the children who have this experience, is that although there's tremendous amounts of fear and horror that are going on, at the same time they seem drawn because of the kind of attention, almost to a point where it seemed like they like it.
Right.
And to me that was a little confusing based on how I think of the stereotype that a lot of us experience it. Oh, this is something forced on you, you didn't want to do it. But this is something that, as you describe it, comes in stages to the point that the child is actually drawn to the person who's committing this.
It's really amazing how in my journey of healing, I trying to make sense of everything, and all the feelings that I was having as an adult, having realized that this had happened to me, so many feelings of, betrayal and disgust and anger and I happened to flip on the TV one night, and there was a 2020 interview, and they were interviewing a man who was in life in prison, an older man, because he had abused so many children. And they were doing an interview with him, and of course, I was like, oh my gosh, here's to talk, to find out what these people think, how this happens. And when it just made my hair stand up, because he started speaking of how I never hurt them. It's our game. The grooming, and it's a lot talked about now, more about the grooming, especially of young children, that there's a trust first, and then there's it's our little secret, it's our game, kids love games and secrets, and then the grooming, as it continues, it gets more and more serious. But the child goes to that person because it's the secret. It's our game. It's our thing together, and you get that special attention. And when he spoke, the way the hair stood up on the back of my neck, I said, "Oh my God!" That's why I didn't say anything for such a long time until it escalated to I was really hurt. And I was physically hurt that I told my mom. But that was, it had been years, already. Mm-hmm. So I think there's an aspect, of course, everyone's story is different, But I really, and in the book too, I relate how I had a dream and how when I awoke, I realized how much I loved those people. At the beginning, the ones that first introduced me to the other group. There was different people, but and that no one ever treated me. I didn't have that energy or attention to me any other time in my life as when they wanted me for that. It's very, it's kind of scary.
Mm-hmm.
We have to watch our kids.
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is, as people, and I think what I find interesting is that as we experience pain, that we, at times, depending on our emotional intelligence or maturity, we tend to run away from it or bury it or just act like it isn't even there. But, as you've been saying, it resurfaces. It always shows itself as a sensation in the body, or whatever the case may be here. And, someone can, as they're in their pain, someone else may be saying, look, you'll get through this, things will be okay, you'll actually grow. You hear all the cliches such as that's what doesn't kill us make us stronger, and on and on and on. But is there insight, and what was the insight that you had specifically from this experience?
Well, I think that what you're saying is so true, and when somebody's in the middle of their pain, those kind of cliches don't really help.
They
perhaps,
don't.
Perhaps it's almost like, you'll get over it. We don't want to hear about it. It's like, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's not my pain, so exactly. I know myself, with the little bits of pain I've had sometimes that you have, your best friends will be like, oh, not this again.
Right, and, it's so important, I think, too, that in the book I do have exercises and things that people can work with themselves, because one of the most important things to realize is that our body is our greatest ally, and that we ourselves, by giving love and attention to those needs that we have, especially the needs of the child, as the adult, we need to still take care of that part of us that perhaps was wounded when we were a child. So sometimes what we're seeking from other people, like, oh, please feel sorry for me, I have that foot pain again, my foot really hurts, and we seek our friends to, again, be sorry for us, but we need to be the ones saying, I hear you, foot, I know you hurt today, let me do something for you. Like, give ourselves the love that we're seeking. And it sounds funny, but and it sounds strange when I first start teaching people about this, but boy, is it effective. And the parts, especially of simple things, will resolve very quickly. And even more complicated things will heal faster when we give ourselves that love and attention that sometimes we seek only from the outside. So I get into your question. The insight, as I said before, when this really came to a head about knowing what happened and really trying to heal it, I had a hyper overactive thyroid problem crop up. I was in my early 40s, so I had been doing some healing work for a while and with myself, and I had this problem come up. And hyperthyroidism, I was even more sensitive than I was already. My touch, my sight, my hearing, my emotions. If I rode on a bumpy road, I'd start crying because it would just shake me up so much. And it kind of triggered I was able to calm those symptoms, but the sensitivity stayed, and I realized, wow, the seed of sensitivity planted when I was younger has now become a skill so finely tuned that I am able to work with people and really be right there with them. Sometimes I even see, hear, or feel what they're going through, so I can be right there as a facilitator when they're going through their healing process. And I truly believe that that seed was planted in the abuse and the injury, making myself sensitive. And then it kind of like that hyperthyroidism, which also came through remembering, flipped a switch in me that my body is now a tool that I can use. I have hypersensitive intuition, empathy, touch, etc. So, and my insight is that all injuries can be turned into a gift, and hence the book.
Exactly.
And that's what I do, is I try to facilitate people discovering what they have gained, if anything, from the injuries. And there's always something. There's always something. It's really amazing.
Now, how were relationships for you as you were growing up?
Well, I have always been, and again, now going to my linear memory, from the time I was in elementary, junior, and high school, even my first college, I've always been very independent. I had friends, but I kept them at a distance, so that they couldn't hurt me, and that I wouldn't get overly involved or invested in others, and kind of take care of myself. I spent a lot of time alone and my horses and riding my horses and things, and so it was kind of tough. I was lonely a lot.
Now, you grew up, though, in a military family. Your father was in the Air Force, correct?
Right.
Okay, and I found when I was reading that, I thought, I know exactly what she's talking about here, because in my younger years, my mom had married a man who was in the Army, so we moved. It felt like a lot, but I know from memory, as I've explained to people, I was actually in a different school every year up through the 6th grade, and then that was the first time that I actually attended a school for more than one grade. And so I could really connect with what you were talking about there, about what it was like to, feel like an outsider, because you're always going into a new school, making new friends, and then before you know it, you're on your way to somewhere else.
Right.
And fortunately, for me anyway, I wasn't the kind of kid that sat in the back of the class, oh, here's the new kid over here, and then all of a sudden the next thing you know, they disappear and nobody really misses them. But, I was kind of more of an attention grabber than that. What I noticed was that I had started, as you were talking about, you start creating this methodology or this mechanism for coping, and that was that I could create rapport very easily, friends very easily, tended to be fairly popular in class, so to speak. The alpha male, if you will, look for the guy who on the playground was the best to exceed them, so I would get this attention.
Yes.
But then I got to a point where if I was there long enough, I would begin to feel uneasy because of how I felt others were getting to know me. Like, okay, now they know who I really am. I wished I could start this all over again.
Right.
And so I could really totally connect with that. Now, I didn't have the kind of experience you had as a young child, but, you wonder about relationships, and is it possible to heal from these traumas, as you described for in the book that it is, how relationships are after the fact? Do they get better?
I think that, well, as all the studies are showing recently, the work of Brené Brown and other people, of how relationship is vital to being healthy human. We need each other. We need people. And I think, just as you're saying, I was able to, I learned, we moved every 2 years, but I learned how to build rapport and make friends. And then, you're going to leave, so you don't get too close. But then once we moved to Puerto Rico and stayed. My dad retired, and so I grew up from middle school up there. So you build a little deeper relationship because you're there for a long time, but I think the big difference after starting the Rubenfeld Synergy training was Alana also created a laboratory where we were together and we were sharing our experiences. And at first I was so awkward because I wanted to learn how to fix the mental, emotional issues so that my clients would heal their physical body faster. And we would sit after she would do a demonstration and a session, and someone would go to a deep place and share something about their life, and then we would talk about it. And I would be sitting there saying, why are we wasting so much time with talking about how these people feel? Who cares? And it was through, it started dawning on me that I was having feelings that I wanted to share. I wanted to be seen in that way, which I never had in all those Air Force years. Never would I cry in front of somebody and tell somebody I was hurt. mean, that was the vow I made to myself as a child. And when I started opening in that training to being seen and heard and loved by people who weren't going away, totally shifted the kind of relationships that I can be in now with people through healing that part of me, through letting down that guard, that vow I made to myself to never share my innermost feelings. When that shifted, I was able to build relationships that are longer lasting and being comfortable with not being perfect all the time, having, saying the wrong thing sometimes, and, whatever that might be, and not feeling like people were going to desert me or go away.
Now, I know that you've probably helped many people over the years with the technique that you talk about in the Propelled Heart. And from what I'm hearing from you, it's very encouraging for our listeners to realize that they're in that place, that they can move forward, and it sounds like you've embraced things you never thought you could experience before. And what I mean by that is, as I finally had felt settled down, and it wasn't until I was in my early 30s in one area where I had actually stayed for about 10-plus years, I began to feel this feeling of how nice it was to be in a community where you'd go into the grocery store, hey, how are you doing today, sort of a thing, or you'd go into this, and you felt like you belonged somewhere.
Right.
And it's a powerful feeling, and even though I couldn't stand where I was living, as far as the house is concerned, it was being in that. And I was asked one time, why did you decide to stay so long? And I said, because for the first time in my life, I feel like there's a place I belong.
Yes.
Now, that being said, that, it wasn't like what I had was a traumatic experience, but obviously I had those coping mechanisms that you were talking about that could come from, let's say, a trauma, and that if you were able to heal, that you really do enjoy life, that memory, does it ever go away, or is it sort of there, but it just doesn't have the emotional hold or the physical hold that it once had?
That's a really great question, and I think that we can't make the things that happened not have happened. Okay. And the emotional charge can be decreased on them, and we can be softer with ourselves with them, and we can make different choices. I think what happens when we ignore or push down memories or hurt feelings or any wound, even if it was from a later time in life, something that happens dramatic, perhaps a divorce or a breakup that's from the adult life even, if we just push it down and don't work through and allow the feelings to release, if you will, to release their hold on us, then we get stuck. So if we don't go through it, we get stuck, and we don't have choice, and it gets triggered all the time. But when we heal it, when we go through and allow ourselves to have those stages of healing, whatever there are books about this, but usually there's fear, anger, guilt, shame, these kind of things. We have to work through them, and through the body is a very effective way, as we were saying. If we work through them, though that thing still did happen, it doesn't have that emotional charge. It doesn't have the hold on us. We might even recognize, there's that feeling that I used to fall in the hole with and be gone for 6 months in some hole of despair. I'm choosing not to go there. I'm not going to let that take me down that rabbit hole again. I'm going to make a different choice now. And it's through the healing that we can make those different choices, So
I think it's such profound insight, and I know that our listeners out there, if they're wanting to find a way to get released from the shackles that bind them, so to speak, the Propelled Heart is certainly something that they should pick up to at least move in that direction. And it's so encouraging what you're talking about here, because what I'm hearing is that we begin to make choices through this healing that are genuinely, authentically in the moment, based on the information we have in our hands, and not some stored or repressed memory that sort of guides that for our protection, so to speak.
Exactly.
Now, one thing for our listeners to help guide them is there a website they can find out more about your work and how they can get a hold of the Propelled Heart?
Well, yes, and the book, The Propelled Heart, Moving From Injury to Insight is on Amazon.com as a Kindle book or paperback. And the exercises, there's exercises after each of the chapters in the second part of the book that people can work with themselves. And I am working through their 17 exercises. I'm putting them on my website free of charge as MP3 downloads. And the website is my name, TonyLuisaRivera.com, and that's TonyLuisaRivera.com. And if you sign up for the newsletter, you will receive the downloads that are on there, and then invitations. I do free webinars online. Actually have one this evening that you could get on and get on still. There's still some space. And tonight's is Discover Your Heart's Message. But in the newsletter, I will be notifying you also of each time I put another exercise up on the website.
Well, Tony, I want to thank you for having the courage and taking the time to join us here on the program to be able to share with others that when healing happens, pretty soon unbelievable potential is before you. And that's got to be a very exciting way to live, isn't it?
It is. And my life is so totally different now than just the work.
Well, like me, I don't run around too much anymore, but now it's time to start traveling again. Tony, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. What a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50 in our website address. You can sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter as well. We also encourage you to follow us on Twitter at Beyond50Radio as well as Facebook, Beyond 50 Radio. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.